Hi, I'm Sarah. My husband called me worthless on the day he forced me to take the bus to our divorce. He said I was nothing. He cut off my money, my name, my place in our life. And when I helped a quiet old man on that bus, he laughed at me, said I always wasted time on broken things. But that man wasn't just anybody. And what happened when my husband found out who he really was changed everything. I thought I was losing everything, but maybe I was finally being seen. Before we begin, what time are you hearing this? And where are you listening from? Let me know in the comments below, because this isn't just a story. It's what happens when silence stops meaning weakness and starts meaning war. He didn't raise his voice when he said it. That was the part that stayed with me. We were standing in the kitchen, the early light coming through the window like it always did on weekday mornings. He had his coffee in one hand, phone in the other, already dressed for work. I was still in my robe, the one I'd owned longer than our marriage. He looked at me the way you look at an item you've already decided to throw away. "You're worthless," he said. Not angry, not dramatic, just certain. For a second, I waited for the rest of the sentence. Some explanation, some justification. But there was nothing else. The word landed and stayed there, heavy and finished, like he'd finally said something he'd been rehearsing for years. What shocked me wasn't the insult. It was how calm he sounded. As if this wasn't cruelty, just a fact he was tired of pretending wasn't true. I remember thinking, oddly enough, that this word didn't start that morning. It had been forming slowly. In the way he stopped asking my opinion, in how decisions were made without me, in the way silence became easier for him than conversation. He took a sip of coffee and glanced at his phone again. "I cut off your access to the accounts," he said, just as casually. "It's temporary, practical. You'll understand later." I didn't ask which accounts. I didn't need to. We'd shared everything for over 20 years. Or so I thought. He talked as if he were explaining a minor inconvenience, like a delayed package or a power outage. This wasn't about money, it was about control. I stood there, nodding, letting the information settle. Somewhere deep inside, something tightened. Not panic yet. More like the quiet realization that the floor had shifted, and I was the only one who felt it. When I asked how I was supposed to get to the attorney's office later that morning, he barely looked up. "You can take the bus," he said. That was it. No hesitation, no discomfort. People like you take buses. People like me don't waste time explaining. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls closer. I noticed how little space I seemed to occupy in my own house. He grabbed his keys, adjusted his jacket, and paused by the door like a man checking off a list. "If you disappear for a while," he added, "nothing really changes." Then he left. I stood there long after the door closed, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock. I told myself to move, to breathe, to do something normal. Eventually, I grabbed my purse and walked to the corner store, the same one I'd been to 100 times. I picked up a small pack of tissues and set it on the counter. When the cashier rang it up, I slid my card across without thinking. She frowned. "Tried again." "I'm sorry," she said, not unkindly. "It's not going through." People behind me shifted. Someone cleared their throat. I felt heat creep up my neck. "That's strange," I said, smiling in that reflexive way women learn early. "Could you try once more?" She did. Same result. "I'm really sorry," I said again, though I had nothing to apologize for. My hands shook as I dug through my purse and found a few folded bills. The cashier gave me a look that was meant to be patient, but landed somewhere closer to pity. I took my tissues and stepped outside, the bell above the door chiming behind me like punctuation. At the bus stop, I bought a ticket with the last of the cash. I folded it carefully, not because it mattered, but because I needed my hands to do something precise. I slipped it into my coat pocket and pressed it flat. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I'd spent years learning how not to make scenes, how not to be difficult, how to stay quiet so the story being told about me wouldn't get worse. Silence had always felt safer than fighting back. As the bus pulled up, I stepped on and took a seat by the window. The doors closed with a soft hiss behind me. I looked straight ahead. As the bus pulled away, I didn't know yet that this ride would change who I was. But I already knew there was no turning back. The bus smelled like metal and old fabric, and every seat felt like a reminder of where I'd been placed. I sat near the middle, by the window, clutching my purse tighter than I needed to. Outside, the city passed in flickers, fast food signs, cracked sidewalks, people on corners checking watches or smoking with that same blank early morning look I must have had. No one made eye contact. Everyone kept to themselves. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to become invisible. There was a time when I never would have stepped onto a city bus. Our SUV had heated seats, tinted windows, satellite radio. We used to drive past these stops, sipping coffee from stainless mugs, laughing about whatever small thing had annoyed him at work that day. It wasn't just about money, it was a life of knowing I had a place, a rhythm. Now, every pothole rattled more than the frame. It shook something loose inside me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I fished it out and looked down, hoping, though I didn't even know for what. Maybe a small apology, some human softness. Instead, there it was. Going forward, direct all communication to my attorney. Paul. That was it. No greeting, no signature, no, hope you're okay. Just a clean surgical cut. For a second, I stared at the screen like it would change. I reread it 3 times. Then I locked the phone and dropped it back in my bag. My ears rang, not from noise, but from the pressure building inside me. I swallowed it down like medicine with no water. It was efficient, I'll give him that. A decade of marriage reduced to a one-line memo. I leaned back and watched a man get on with a crying toddler. The little girl's voice rose and fell like she was asking questions no one could answer. Her father looked exhausted but kind. He offered her a cracker from his jacket pocket, and she quieted. They sat across from me. I kept my face turned toward the window. No more conversations. No more small fights about grocery lists or dinner plans. From here on, every word between us would be filtered through someone paid to twist them. No tone, no context, just statements, requests, counters, deadlines. I'd always thought the worst part of divorce was the betrayal. Turns out, it's the paperwork. I hadn't wanted a fight, but here I was, drafted into one anyway. When the bus pulled up to my stop, I stood, adjusted my coat, and stepped off. The sidewalk felt colder than I expected. Everything around me moved with purpose. Business people in long coats, joggers dodging traffic lights, a woman in heels barking into a headset. I was the only one standing still. The building was ahead, just a block down. Glass front, dull gray stone, nothing remarkable. I took a step, then another. My hands were cold, my fingers trembled. I could have turned around right then, walked away, told myself it wasn't the right day. But I didn't, because there wasn't really anywhere to go back to. I checked my wallet before walking in. There were 3 crumpled bills left and some change. Enough for lunch, maybe, but not for a ride home. The trip here had emptied my cash. If I wanted to get back, I'd have to walk or wait hours for the next bus. It hit me then, quiet and heavy. This whole thing, this divorce, was already one way. No round trip, no, let's think about it. He'd made his choice. What I did now was mine alone. I didn't react. I didn't sigh or make some dramatic mental speech. I just folded the wallet shut and placed it back into my bag. I hadn't called anyone, not my sister, not my oldest friend, not even my grown son, who probably wouldn't have understood anyway. There's a kind of shame that lives in silence. You don't want to hear, "I told you so," or "You should have left him years ago." You just want someone to say, "I see you, and I'm sorry." But no one can say that if they don't know. So I kept it to myself, for now. Not because I was proud, but because I wasn't ready to hear what they'd say back. I stepped closer to the building. The automatic doors opened as I approached. There was a faint hum as they closed behind me, a soft finality in the way they shut out the world behind me. And as the door shut behind me, I realized the silence I'd lived with for years was about to be tested. Silence had always been my way of keeping the peace, but that day, it felt like a weapon turned against me. The door clicked softly behind me as I stepped into the attorney's office. The air was cooler than outside, faintly lemon-scented, overly still. A young woman in dark glasses behind the reception desk gave me a quick, professional nod and motioned to a seat. I sat, clutching my bag in my lap, unsure what to do with my hands. When I was called in, the office itself was quiet, but not warm. Clean lines, shelves full of leather-bound books nobody reads. My attorney, Angela, wore navy, hair pulled back too tightly, eyes that darted quickly between my face and the papers in front of her. "We'll go over the basics first," she said, flipping open a folder. "Temporary orders, asset disclosure, support." Every word came at me like a spreadsheet I was supposed to understand by instinct. She spoke calmly, efficiently. But all I could think was how strange it was to hear my life chopped into pieces and labeled with words like liability, division, entitlement. I answered questions without pausing: birth date, address, years married, children, none still dependent. Income, well, that was a punchline now, wasn't it? I nodded through it all. I didn't ask for clarification, didn't push back. At one point, she paused, looked at me for just a beat longer than usual. "You're agreeing to a lot without hesitation," she said gently. My mouth moved before I could stop it. "That's fine." She raised an eyebrow, not judgmental, just aware. I hated that I knew why I said it. Hated more that it wasn't the first time I'd said it in a room where I didn't actually feel fine. How many times had I said that to Paul? When he forgot something important. When he dismissed my opinion with a laugh. When I felt a line being crossed but was too tired to explain why. That's fine. It was never fine. As Angela continued, my phone buzzed on silent inside my purse. When she paused to pull a document from her drawer, I glanced at the screen. A message from my sister. Not, "How are you?" or "I'm here if you need anything." Just, "Don't make trouble right now." That was it. It hit harder than any insult Paul had ever thrown at me. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I exhaled. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt. It was a quiet resignation, the kind that had been baked into my role since I was a kid. The youngest. The one who didn't rock the boat. The one expected to keep everyone else calm, even when the room was burning down. Don't make trouble. Trouble was saying what you needed. Trouble was asking for fairness. Trouble was deciding that maybe your pain mattered too. I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I started to type, "This is not trouble. This is survival." Then deleted it. I closed the message and placed the phone face down beside my elbow. She probably meant well, or maybe she didn't. Maybe she meant exactly what she wrote. Keep it quiet. Be small. Disappear if you must, but don't embarrass the family. And maybe that was the role I'd played for so long. No one could imagine me doing anything else. I excused myself for a break when Angela stepped out to take a call. I needed air, space. I walked to a small plaza across the street. A coffee cart was there, but I didn't stop. Just sat on a bench near the edge, back to the building, and watched people rush past. Everyone looked like they had somewhere to be. I pulled out my phone again, held it. Thought about calling someone, anyone. My son, my cousin in Virginia, even my old college roommate who I hadn't seen in years. But I knew what they'd say. Are you sure this is the right move? You've always been sensitive. You don't want to regret this later. And so, I didn't call. I just sat. City noise filled the space around me. Distant sirens, horns, snippets of conversation. I focused on the sound of footsteps on pavement, the flutter of birds pecking at crumbs nearby. I'd spent so many years keeping things calm, measured responses, walking on eggshells, smoothing the mood when Paul was cold or sharp. It had become muscle memory, but the cost was high. I felt it now, in my chest, in my back, in the way my jaw ached from being clenched too long. Every piece of myself I'd trimmed back just to keep someone else comfortable was adding up. And now, even my own family didn't want me to step out of that mold. I didn't promise myself revenge. That wasn't the point. I just finally saw the truth, raw and unpretty. Keeping the peace had cost me pieces of myself, and I wasn't sure how many were left. The wind picked up a little as I stood on the corner, waiting for the bus. I tightened my grip on the thin stack of papers in my tote, their sharp edges pressing into my side like a quiet warning. Divorce papers, legal language, my name in bold, still fresh, still real. No one else seemed to notice me. People passed by with earbuds in, coffee cups in hand, phones to their ears. They looked right through me, maybe the same way I'd looked through women at bus stops before all this. I wondered if they assumed I was invisible, or if I just blended in that well now. The bus was running late. I checked the time again, not because I had somewhere to be, but because standing there made me feel exposed, like I was being punished in plain sight. When it finally arrived, the brakes hissed, and the doors folded open with a sound that always reminded me of a sigh. I stepped up and fumbled in my bag for the exact change. My fingers shook slightly, not from cold, but from some buried place of embarrassment. The driver didn't speak. He just nodded once, bored, his gaze already drifting to the line behind me. I could feel the heat of people waiting, their subtle shifting from one foot to the other. I hurried, paid, and moved toward an open seat, too far back, too close to everyone. I sat near the middle and kept my head down. The bus groaned forward, and I gripped the rail next to my seat, grounding myself against the sway of the road. Then my phone buzzed. I hesitated, but the screen was already lit up with Paul's name. A message, just a sentence. The bus is fine for people like you. People like me. I read it again, just to be sure. There was no emoji, no sarcasm in text form to soften the blow. Just those 7 words. 7 words that turned my stomach. People like you. It wasn't just petty, it was calculated, precise. That phrase didn't refer to a transportation choice. It labeled me, separated me, shoved me into a category I'd never imagined for myself. He didn't mean financially, he meant socially, emotionally. He was putting me in a box marked less than. My ears started to ring. The hum of the bus, the distant conversation behind me, even the soft static of a talk radio playing near the front, all of it blurred out. I felt reduced, diminished. I locked my phone and slipped it into my bag without replying. The bus jerked as more people climbed on. By the next stop, it was full. I offered my seat to an older woman who smiled politely but didn't say thank you. I stood, clutching the rail, shoulder to shoulder with strangers, all of us swaying in rhythm with the bus. No one looked at me. I didn't want them to, but part of me wanted to scream. Not just at Paul, at everyone. At the people who sat across from me on dinner tables and never asked how I really was. At the neighbors who waved at Paul, never me. At myself, for going so long without seeing the slow erosion of who I was. Rush hour had no kindness, just movement. A press of bodies, the scent of too much cologne and not enough space, the quiet murmur of people going somewhere that wasn't here. And still, I stayed quiet. Until something shifted. It was small. A flicker, almost nothing. But I felt it, deep in my chest. A refusal. For the first time, I didn't swallow the feeling. I didn't tell myself I was overreacting. I didn't soften the edges to make anyone else more comfortable. I was angry, not just at Paul, at the idea that I was supposed to take it, all of it, silently. I stood taller, not much, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for me to feel it. That invisible line that had been drawn in front of me for years. I felt my foot hovering over it. At the next stop, I could have gotten off. I thought about it, thought about walking, about calling someone, anyone, just to hear a voice that didn't drip with judgment. But I didn't move, not out of fear, out of clarity. I needed to sit with this, to let it settle, not pass. This wasn't the moment for escape. It was the moment for witnessing. I had spent too long pretending things were fine the moment they stopped hurting. This time, I would stay until I understood the shape of the pain. As the bus pulled forward again, I caught my reflection in the window. The afternoon light cast strange shadows, but I could still see myself. And for once, I didn't look broken. I looked different, changed. There was something unfamiliar in my own eyes. Not grief, not defeat. Something else. Strength, maybe. Or the start of it. I didn't know what decision I would make yet, but I knew I was closer to it than ever before. I stayed quiet, my hands still resting in my lap, as the bus rattled over another cracked patch of pavement. Outside, the buildings blurred past like a film reel I wasn't part of anymore. Inside, everything felt louder, the shuffle of boots, the faint buzz of someone's earbuds leaking music, the occasional cough. My body was still, but my mind wasn't. The decision hadn't come in words. It was more like a shift in the ground beneath me, a knowing. Something inside me had started to lean forward, even if I hadn't moved yet. Then, it happened. The driver tapped the brakes a little harder than expected. The bus jolted, a bag slid across the floor, and an elderly man near the front, already shaky on his feet, lost his balance. His cane clattered, and for a breath too long, he was just hanging there, one hand on the pole, the rest of him swaying with nothing to catch him. People looked, then looked away. The kind of look you give when you're not sure if it's your problem or not. The kind where you wait, hoping someone else will step up first. But no one moved. I didn't either, not at first. I was tired, not just the bone-deep kind, but the kind that settles behind your eyes and stays. I'd had a long morning and a longer month. I was raw, I was quiet, and honestly, I didn't want another reason for people to glance at me like I was out of place. A voice inside whispered, "Don't draw attention. You've been invisible this long. Keep it that way." But another voice, one I hadn't heard in a while, asked a different question. If you turn away now, who do you become? So I stood. I walked the few steps forward and placed a hand on the man's elbow. He looked at me, startled but grateful, and I guided him gently to the seat I had just given up minutes before. He nodded in thanks. That was it. No applause, no small talk, no one else reacted. I didn't need them to. I didn't do it for show. I did it because I still could. And for the first time that day, I didn't feel like nothing. There was a quiet kind of power in it, in choosing kindness when the world hadn't shown me much of it. My legs were steady, my chest didn't feel tight, and even though the bus was still moving, for once, I didn't feel like I was being dragged behind it. Then my phone vibrated again. I pulled it out without much urgency. Paul's name lit up the screen. The message was short, cutting. Playing the hero now? That's cute. You were never built for it. I stared at the words, not surprised, not angry, just aware. He'd always had a way of taking my best moments and twisting them, of making me second-guess even my simplest instincts. Years ago, if he'd said something like that, I'd have believed it. I'd have apologized for stepping out of line, for embarrassing him, for making things complicated. But I didn't reply. I locked the screen, slipped the phone back into my coat pocket. The silence afterward felt like a choice, not a defeat. I looked down at my hands, open, resting at my sides. They were steady, capable, real, not clumsy or fragile or weak. Not like the version of me he liked to describe when he thought I wasn't listening. Something had changed. Not in the world, not yet. But in me. I hadn't stood because I was trying to prove anything. I hadn't done it for recognition or to claim some moral high ground. I'd stood because there was someone who needed help. Because silence wasn't the right thing anymore. Because I still had a self I could return to, even if I had to dig to find her. There was no grand music, no cinematic swell of pride, just the hum of the engine, the sigh of worn brakes, the murmured lives of strangers. But inside me, a new kind of resolve settled in. I didn't know yet what this choice would cost me, but I knew I wouldn't take it back. I stepped off the bus and onto the sidewalk like I was crossing some invisible border. The wind had picked up, sharp against my face, and for a moment I just stood there, unsure of where to go next. My phone buzzed again in my coat pocket. I didn't want to look, but I did. Paul, let's not pretend you helped that man out of compassion. You just wanted someone to see you. That was the message. Cool, detached, measured. I stared at it, stunned not by the words, but by the familiarity. That exact tone, that smug kind of logic dressed up as concern. It always started that way, with something that could pass as reasonable if you read it fast. I was just being honest. I'm trying to help you see yourself clearly. I know you better than anyone. What he really meant was, stay small, stay quiet, stay useful. Another buzz followed before I could put the phone away. Paul. You've always had a soft spot for broken things. Guess it makes you feel whole. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I did. Perfectly. That was Paul at his finest, saying something that sounded poetic, like it should be stitched onto a throw pillow. But I knew what he meant. He was talking about me. About my habit of showing up for people he'd rather ignore. About the way I lingered at church long after service to help clean up, or how I used to leave groceries on my neighbor's porch without a note. He'd always say, "You need to feel needed. That's your problem." And now here it was again, packaged neatly in a sentence designed to make me doubt myself. Designed to cut. I didn't cry. I didn't respond. I stood on the sidewalk and let the cold bite into me. Across the street was a brick building I recognized, the place my attorney had recommended for low-cost document notarizing. I made my way toward it slowly, hands in my pockets, one step at a time. Inside, it smelled like ink and old carpet. A woman behind a desk asked if I needed help, and I just nodded, pulling out my phone again. That's when the legal document came through. No warning, no discussion. Just a PDF titled Temporary Financial Agreement. I opened it, scanned the lines quickly. No spousal support, no joint asset access. 0 allocated assistance during proceedings. All wrapped in polite phrases like mutually agreed terms and voluntary waiver. I felt the room tilt slightly. Not enough to fall, just enough to know I wasn't on solid ground. I could hear him in my head. You said you wanted to do this on your own. I'm just helping you do that. I sat down in the nearest chair, my phone balanced in my hand. For a moment, I let my thumb hover over his contact. Every part of me screamed to call him, to say, "How dare you?" to beg, to explain, to ask what I'd done that made him think I deserved this. But I'd done that before. I'd walked that road more times than I could count. And it always led to the same place, more silence. Or worse, his voice, calm and measured, tearing through me while insisting it was love. So I did something else. I opened my email, attached the document, sent it to my attorney with no message, no note, just the file. Let her handle it. Let someone else carry the weight of his games. Then I went to the restroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. For once, I didn't look broken. I looked alert, present. By the time I stepped outside again, the wind had died down. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. My phone buzzed one last time before I put it on silent. Paul, I know you're lost. You always were. You just needed something to feel useful. I stared at that line. Something to feel useful. That hit harder than worthless. It was the same cage, just with softer padding. I wasn't allowed to be anything, only to be of use, and only in ways that served him. I didn't answer. I opened our message thread, scrolled all the way up, and then slowly deleted it. Not in anger, in clarity. He didn't get to narrate my story anymore. Not in words, not in money, not in the twisted way he pretended to understand me while undermining every decent thing I tried to do. He had taught me something, though. That silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's a line drawn in sand. And for the first time, I understood that silence could be a weapon, if I chose how to use it. That understanding would matter more than I knew, sooner than I expected. The next bus ride was later that afternoon. The same route, same bench at the stop. But something in me had changed. I wasn't just riding anymore, I was watching. When I stepped on, he was already there. The old man from before, seated near the front again, same calm posture, same simple coat. He didn't look at me right away, but I could tell he'd seen me. Eventually, he gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible. Not a smile, not gratitude, just acknowledgement. And somehow that meant more than if he'd stood up and applauded. He hadn't said a word to me the last time, and today, still nothing. He just sat with that quiet presence, not fragile, not confused, steady, intentional. At first, I wondered if maybe he didn't remember me helping him. Maybe age had softened his recall. But no, he knew. It was in the look, measured, aware, and the fact that he said nothing, that felt deliberate. He wasn't ignoring me, he was observing, just like I was. The bus rumbled along, stopping every few blocks, more people getting on. I moved farther back this time, not too far, but far enough to watch the front without drawing attention. As we turned onto a busier street, I noticed something else. The driver greeted him with a quiet, "Afternoon, sir," when he boarded. Not loud, not formal, but with a kind of deference you don't often hear on a public bus. And earlier, I'd missed it, but now I remembered. One of the younger passengers had stood and offered him a seat before I even noticed he was there. No words passed between them, no demand, just instinct. Respect that didn't require a backstory. People don't do that for just anyone. I studied him then, the way he held himself. Upright, but not rigid. The way his eyes moved, not frantically, like someone nervous in public, but like someone used to scanning a room, someone who knew what to look for. He reminded me of my grandfather, who'd fought in 2 wars and never raised his voice, but commanded an entire dinner table with just a glance. Who was this man? That question lingered until my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting another document or automated alert. But no, It was Paul. Paul. Do you even know who that guy is? Just like that, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He'd seen me, somehow, either on the bus earlier or someone told him. Or maybe he was just guessing, playing one of his usual games. Either way, the message was taunting, laced with smugness. The words seemed casual, but the meaning beneath them wasn't. That tone, "You're always the last to know." His favorite way to remind me I was a step behind, always out of the loop, always grasping at crumbs of understanding. Not this time. I didn't respond. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't need to. The truth, whatever it was coming. And I wasn't about to beg him to explain it to me like I was some foolish woman who'd done something embarrassing. So I tucked my phone away. The bus slowed as we reached another intersection, engine groaning a little from the stop. The man stood. Not slowly, not carefully. Just stood, balanced and sure. I half expected him to stumble again, but he didn't even sway. And then, just as the doors opened, he turned. He looked right at me. It wasn't a long look. It didn't ask for anything. It wasn't warm or cold. But it meant something. It said, "You saw me and I saw you." It said, "There's more coming. Be ready." It said, "I'm not finished here." Then he stepped off the bus and into the fading light of the late afternoon. The engine roared back to life. We moved forward. But I stayed in that moment just a little longer, heart steady, hands folded in my lap. In that look, I sensed that whatever was coming next would not be loud, but it would be final. After he stepped off that bus, something shifted in me. Not just emotionally, I mean physically, in the way I carried myself. My spine straightened without effort. My hands didn't tremble when I put my phone away. It felt like the wind had changed, and it followed me. Later that day, as I walked into the legal building downtown, I felt it at my back. Not the chill of fear, but the presence of something I couldn't yet name. It stayed with me as I checked in, took the elevator, and entered the glass-walled conference room where the next round of paperwork was waiting. Paul was already there. He stood when I walked in, all buttoned up smugness and expensive cologne. "Didn't think you'd actually show," he said, barely glancing at me. His voice was just loud enough for the receptionist to hear, like he wanted witnesses. I didn't answer. I just sat down. He smirked, leaned against the table, then muttered under his breath, "Did you end up giving that old guy your last $5 too? Always knew you were drawn to broken things." I looked at the folder in front of me and flipped it open. I didn't need to rise to it. He was already performing for an audience I didn't see yet. A few minutes later, the door opened again. At first, no one reacted. Then a man stepped in, calm, composed, the same man from the bus. Same posture, same slow, deliberate pace. Except here, in this space, something was different. The receptionist stood up straighter. The paralegal who'd barely made eye contact with me before nodded to him like they knew each other. And someone, one of the attorneys, said quietly, "Good evening, Judge." Paul turned. I didn't. I didn't need to. I could feel it in the room, the way people shifted, hushed, watched themselves. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from surprise, but from respect, or fear, or both. No one introduced him, no big announcement. He simply took a seat at the head of the table. Paul blinked twice. What's he doing here?" No one answered. He cleared his throat, leaned toward one of the clerks. "Is this some kind of mistake?" The judge, because now that word felt right, opened his folder and began reviewing something. Not rushed, not flustered, just steady. Paul fidgeted, then laughed a little too loud. "You've got to be kidding me. He's just some guy from the bus." No reaction. Then Paul stood, fast, like he was about to say more, but he didn't. His body froze halfway between posture and collapse. And then, without another word, he sat back down. Hard, No one moved. No one told him to do it. But he did. His shoulders dropped. His hands clasped in his lap like a schoolboy waiting to be scolded. I watched his reflection in the glass and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. Real fear. Not the kind that lashes out or yells, the kind that comes when someone realizes, too late, that the rules of the game have changed, and they're no longer holding the dice. He turned toward me then, eyes wide, not soft, not apologetic, just pleading. "Emily," he said. That was the first time he'd said my name all day. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't even try to explain. He just wanted me to save him from the moment. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence said everything. The judge continued as if none of it had happened. Calm voice, clear instructions. Legal terms I only half understood but didn't interrupt. I watched Paul shrink in his chair, shrinking from a truth he wasn't ready to meet. Then it was my turn. I stood, not in defiance, but in stillness. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for privacy. I simply said, "I'm fine proceeding here. Let's keep it formal." Paul opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I saw his fingers twitch toward his phone, then fall back into his lap. And so it continued, on record, in public. No more secrets, no more staged performances behind closed doors. I let it all play out exactly where it needed to be seen. When it was over, the judge closed his file. He looked at me, not long, not with any smile. Just a nod, like we'd both understood something without ever saying it. I nodded back, and as the room slowly found its breath again, I realized the fight was over, even if the healing wasn't. As the conference room emptied and the echo of closing doors faded, I stayed seated a moment longer. Not from fatigue, from stillness. It wasn't the silence of defeat, it was the kind of silence you earn. Outside, dusk had settled. The sidewalks shimmered under the amber haze of early evening. I walked to the bus stop without rushing, each step softer than the last, like my body finally knew it didn't have to brace itself anymore. When the bus pulled up, the sound of its brakes, sharp and familiar, didn't jolt me the way it used to. I stepped on, swiped my pass, and slid into the same spot near the window. Same cracked plastic seat. Same faint whine in the overhead light. But nothing about this ride felt the same. This time I wasn't shrinking into the corner, hoping to be invisible. I wasn't counting the stops until I could disappear into a place that didn't feel like mine. I just sat, breathing, watching, feeling my own weight without apology. Halfway through the ride, my phone buzzed. A message from Paul. "Can we talk? Just you and me. Not like today. Just private." I read it once. I didn't need to read it again. Not because I was angry. Not because I was above it. Because I finally understood what silence was for. I locked the screen, slipped the phone into my bag, and looked out the window. The world kept moving. Kids on scooters, an older woman dragging 2 bags of groceries, a teenager with headphones bouncing to a rhythm no one else heard. Life didn't pause for my pain or his regret, and I didn't need it to. That message, it wasn't an olive branch. It was a rope, hoping I'd grab hold, step back into the role I'd played too long. The one who softened, explained, soothed the man who'd broken things, and then begged me to help him gather the pieces. But I was done patching up damage I didn't cause. I glanced down and noticed something in the side pocket of my jacket. The folded bus ticket from earlier. The one I hadn't meant to keep, but never threw out. I slid it between my fingers. The crease had deepened from being folded and refolded, edges worn from rubbing against my keys. When I'd first held it, it felt like proof of failure, of being reduced, discarded, replaced. Now it felt like something else entirely. Proof that I kept going, that I got on the bus, that I showed up, that I didn't wait for someone to rescue me. that I sat in that seat, head high, hands steady, when the world expected me to disappear. I pressed the ticket between my palms. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. When the bus hissed to a stop near my street, I stood slowly, no urgency, no weight dragging behind me. Just movement. The sky was soft now, deep blue fading into night. I walked along the sidewalk past familiar porches and parked cars. Lights glowed behind curtains. A dog barked once, then went quiet. No one was waiting for me at the gate. That used to ache, but now it just was. I stopped outside the apartment, took a breath, then thought of him, the old man on the bus, not as a symbol, not as a twist of fate, but as a reminder. He didn't need to say a word for me to feel seen, because dignity doesn't need volume. It recognizes itself when it shows up, quiet, steady, and unshaken. I stepped inside, flicked on the hallway light, and dropped my keys into the bowl by the door. Then I reached for my wallet, unfolded it, and slid the bus ticket inside, not as a keepsake of pain, but as a marker. The day I stopped proving myself. The moment I chose not to explain. The instant I became someone I could respect. Same bus, same route, same city, but not the same woman. I was never worthless. I was just quiet in a world that only listens to noise.